Good morning. The last 48 hours of hyperactive fake news narratives make clear that our enemy, the modern British financial empire, thinks they are trapping Donald Trump into continuing their insane war against Russia in Ukraine. Since 2018, they have campaigned to keep Russia, China, India, and the United States destabilized because if these nations work together, their empire is doomed. They're otherwise using the ideologically brainwashed and split Republican Congress and lunatic judges in the federal courts to slow Trump's agenda. Unless the debt ceiling gets lifted by July, Secretary Bessent tells us, and Trump's budget and tax policy get passed, they will also continue to try to crash the U.S. economy. I'm Barbara Boyd, and this is your Saturday Wrap. First, let's look at the big stories happening right now, today. In Switzerland, the United States and China are sitting down and discussing trade. My hope is that this will lead to a reordering of the world financial system, resulting in Russia, China, and India together with the United States being able to dictate terms of surrender to the dying British financial empire of the City of London, Wall Street, Brussels, and its various offshore havens. The first topic in these talks will be stopping the flow of fentanyl precursors from China to the Mexican cartels and others, and neutralizing related drug money laundering schemes. This poisonous trade is killing hundreds of thousands of Americans, particularly the young. I'm going to tell you soon about the fundamental rethink, which will get us from these first necessary steps, stopping the poison, to our ultimate goal, a just and prosperous community of principle among thriving nation states. Stay with me and we'll get there. In Oman, ahead of Trump's trip to Saudi Arabia next week, Trump's emissary, Steve Witkoff, is sitting down today with the Iranians to negotiate a new nuclear deal, which will head off a potentially disastrous new war in the Middle East. Netanyahu and Israel want to attack Iran's nuclear facilities militarily. Trump has rejected this approach, and the insider scuttlebutt this week makes clear that Trump is now moving independently of Israel to attempt to bring peace to this region. Overnight, the Trump administration mediated a ceasefire between India and Pakistan, which was also escalating into all-out war. You'll notice the nations at issue here: China, Russia, India. But today, in Kiev, Ukraine, the enemy is laying the trap I told you about. The so-called coalition of the willing, the discredited British, French, German, and other failing and increasingly fascist European countries want to continue the Ukraine war, and they will meet with Zelensky and the Ukrainians to present a proposal for a 30-day unconditional ceasefire in the war against Russia. They are desperate to stop the prospect of a new and positive relationship between the United States and Russia. As of today, the media is very loud with claims that they believe they have trapped President Trump into their immediate ceasefire gambit, and that if Russia does not go along with it, massive new sanctions will be imposed on Russia from the Europeans and the United States, and new weapons packages will flow to Ukraine to continue the war. Senator Lindsey Graham and what he says are 70 other idiot senators are already boosting these sanctions to the top of the legislative agenda, way ahead of what most Trump voters want the Senate to do. I personally think they are delusional, and the president is just super ticked and frustrated with both sides for what he views as their fixed positions. Trump clearly knows that historical truth is solidly on the Russian side. He's almost said so. But the overhang from the lingering hatred of Russia here, particularly in the Congress and Washington generally, stands in the way of the president being able to expeditiously do what he recognizes is right. He has to deal with these idiots in Congress to get his program passed. So in Washington, saying just what I just said, that Putin may be right, that Russia stands on the right side of history in this particular war, is virtually touching a third rail in Washington, D.C. You cannot say that directly. All of the norms and everything else are considered to be crazy. You'll be viewed as a Putin puppet, regardless of the fact that you're telling the truth. Now, the way you wreck these plans is by exposing them. Those with access to the appropriate files can make a huge difference right now by exposing the Ukrainian links to at least 2 of the assassination attempts against Trump, the Ukrainian players and operations in the illegal operations against his 2016 campaign, the Ukrainian operations in the seditious coup against his first presidency. While they are at it, they might want also to expose longstanding NATO support for neo-Nazis in Ukraine, the gangster thug force which holds the Ukrainian people and politicians hostage, with assassinations and open threats of violence if they step out of line. You out there can also make a huge difference by telling your congressman or senator that the war needs to be settled by solving its root causes, that the Russians are right. That means NATO and the Europeans have to butt out of things militarily, that Ukraine must become a neutral country, and that the 4 Russian-speaking oblasts issue, no, it's not all of Ukraine or all of Europe, together with Crimea, remain united with Russia. That's the result the people in those contested areas already voted for. Ukraine also has to outlaw any support of Hitler or fascism, what the Russians refer to as denazification. That should be easy. Germany already did that after World War II. You can find all the background material you need on the Promethean Action website, including updates from just this week. Now, what I told you about that great rethink about the China trade negotiation. If I was in the room for the initial negotiations between the United States and China, I would ask both countries as an initial exercise to step back and review what happened in 1971, when the British agent George Shultz convinced Richard Nixon to kill the Bretton Woods monetary system. Under a deliberate plan by the Trilateral Commission and the City of London at that time, which they called, and I quote, controlled disintegration of the U.S. economy, the productive capacity of the U.S. was gradually totally offshored to China and other cheap labor countries. China became the world's factory, its workshop, at the lowest wages possible and under strict rules of social conformity. That's a major limiting factor on their ultimate productive capacity. Against its own best interest, it adopted green and other globalist policies and identified the United States as its problem, rather than the empire located in the City of London, Wall Street, and its various offshore havens. In fact, China sought to adapt and play within that imperial system, just like the elites of our country sought to play and profit from that same deadly imperial system. If China and the U.S. balance their trade and both cherish and fully develop their labor forces, joining in great infrastructure and frontier science projects, and invite Russia and India to join them, you have a productive power and economic strength sufficient to dictate terms of surrender to the British financial empire on behalf of humanity. That's the essence of Lyndon LaRouche's Four Powers proposal, which at various times in recent history have almost come to fruition. The empire knows this. That's why the British have identified the United States, Russia, India, and China as nations which must always be kept destabilized and at each other's throats. They said openly in a 2018 report by the House of Lords, along with stipulating in the same report that Donald Trump should never be allowed to have a second term. Finally, let's talk about the status of Trump's agenda in the Congress and what is rapidly becoming a judicial insurrection. Congress could deflate this judicial insurrection quickly with just two measures legislatively. The first has already passed the House and is in the Senate. It prevents federal courts from issuing nationwide injunctions. The second would allow for expedited deportation of everyone who entered the country illegally under Biden. That has not yet been proposed in the Congress, although it's being discussed. The increasingly delusional hysteria expressed by many federal judges reached new heights this week. They have literally brainwashed themselves to believe that Trump is a dictator and they alone can prevent a new night of the long knives by standing against him, no matter if their decisions totally exceed the constitutional boundaries of the judicial power. It does you no good to cite the actual laws Trump is using to enact the agenda that people voted for, to remind them that there isn't a national emergency because millions of Americans simply disagree with their woke ideology. On Thursday, Supreme Court Justice Sotomayor, who is a little batty anyway, frantically called upon lawyers to mobilize and man the barricades to fight the president. Chief Justice Roberts also did a special interview to highlight the independence of judges, saying they're necessary to check both the excesses of the president and the Congress, while railing against very justified calls to impeach out-of-control judges, like those of the District of Columbia District Court, which, of course, John Roberts hails from. Getting the president's budget passed, getting his executive orders into legislation is also now very much up to a mobilization of the people ahead of 2026. There's plenty of cynicism out there about what you can do with the Congress. But these guys are up for re-election in both the House and the Senate in 2026. And it's very clear they run scared now when the people mobilize on issues and programs, something that didn't happen before. That's what the mandate on November 5th has accomplished. They have realized they just might be an endangered species. This thought needs to be constantly reinforced by the people letting them know that. This can be won if the people embrace the productive identity Trump's golden age offers them and build their own political future. Call your senator or congressman now. I'm studying Justice John Roberts' career right now, and we'll be writing about him soon. The story that has intrigued me is Norm Eison's claim that he and the justice are best buddies, and they work together on lawfare in Czechoslovakia in Europe. That lead comes from Mike Benz. Norm Eisen, you might know, is one of the key operatives in all of the lawfare against Donald Trump. Finally, again, we're growing. We need you. If you like these briefs, go to Promethean Action right now and become a subscriber. We're in need of 1,000 paid subscribers to expand our coverage, maybe get to daily briefs like this. I appreciate, obviously, all the great comments you give me, but the best encouragement you can give me is to go to Promethean Action right now and subscribe. Thanks very much for listening. I'll see you again on Monday.
Thanks for watching. Please take a moment and subscribe to our free newsletter at prometheanaction.com.